Hi, my name is Anthony Millen. I'm very excited to be co-hosting the monthly blend with my co-host, Tien Wang. This is our fifth show now, and we have a great show today. We have 4 founders and CEOs, all from the DMV startup ecosystem. We have John Agri, founder and CEO of the Unicorn Group, Samir Gulati, founder and CEO of Ordway, Beth Johnson, founder and CEO of RP3, and Andrea Pace, founder and CEO of Novel Micro Devices. And so what I'd like to do just to start off is to just kind of go around, starting with John and then Samir and Beth and Andrea. Just if each of you could just introduce yourself and maybe give just a short description of your background and your company's background would be great. And we can start, John, with you.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. John Agri, Chairman and CEO of the Unicorn Group. We're an executive relationship marketing company. We've been around since 2002 here in the DMV, based out of Tysons. What that essentially means is that we help C-suite executives solve complex business development challenges by connecting them with other C-suite executives. We've got 130 companies across the country that we service. 75 of them are tech startups, but we also handle Fortune 500 companies, including Clear Channel, iHeartMedia. And I just started a new startup called Din, which we can talk about later. So good to meet everybody.
Hi, everyone. Samir Gulati. I'm founder and CEO of Ordway Labs. Ordway is an enterprise software platform for order to revenue automation. And what we do is automate and streamline everything between sales and finance, from contract management to billing, payment collections, processing, revenue recognition, all the way to GL. We started the company in 2018, so we are just around 3 years old. And prior to Ordway, I have spent 2 decades building similar software in billing, accounting, ERP. I used to live in Silicon Valley, so that probably might be a good conversation topic as we're talking about DMV entrepreneurs over here. But I've spent a decade in Silicon Valley as part of companies where I joined as the first 10 employees, and many of them ended up becoming huge multi-billion-dollar companies like Workday, Zora, Intact, and Zynga.
Hi, everyone. And John, I have to tell you, I am a big fan of Din. So I'm excited to hear about that.
Beth, good to see you.
So I'm Beth Johnson. I'm CEO and founder of RP3. I have spent my career in advertising and marketing in this region and started this company 11 years ago. We're a creative communications agency. We're based in Bethesda. And we work with some of the region's largest brands, like many that you would recognize, like Giant Food and Children's National, Hilton, Long & Foster, as well as brands outside the region, Fortune 500 companies like Norfolk Southern. And what we do is we help guide our clients' brand strategy and communications to support the business outcomes they care about and engage their stakeholders. So I'm very happy to be here because as Tien knows, I'm very passionate about the startup community here in this region. Even though most of our clients are larger, I think that the startup culture here really strengthens our community and creates a great talent pool for us to draw from, and also creates the next generation of clients for us to work with, like Din, I hope.
Touche.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Pace, and I'm the founder and CEO of Novel Micro Devices. We're a Baltimore-based biotech startup, in vitro diagnostic startup, developing a highly accurate and rapid infectious disease diagnostic platform for use at the point of care. Point of care means at the location where care is given, so at the clinic or at the urgent care, for example. And currently samples are collected and they're sent out to labs, and we all know how long those lab tests take to get back and for results to be available. So the system that we're developing makes it possible for all those sensitive tests to be performed right there at the clinic, so accurate treatment and diagnosis can be provided immediately to the patient. And we're developing tests for multiple infectious diseases ranging from COVID-19 and respiratory infections to sexually transmitted infections. And our customers are, healthcare providers that don't have lab facilities, both in the US as well as in overseas and low and middle income countries where access to healthcare is extremely limited.
Wonderful. So we have a great range of entrepreneurs on the call today, which is going to be really exciting for us and for our listeners. So to start off with, what I'd like to do is to just hear from each of you, and then we can kind of open it up to discussions among the group, but how you see from a founder's perspective, since we're focusing on the DMV, how you've seen the DMV startup market evolve over the last several years. So how have you seen it today versus just say 3 to 5 years ago? And then also would be interesting to see how the evolution has been impacted by COVID and kind of your experiences in terms of how COVID has impacted in some way the startup market from your perspective. And maybe for this one, we'll start with Samir and we'll go from there.
Sure. Thanks, Anthony. I moved to DC in 2009, and once a startup person is always a startup person, I got involved in the startup ecosystem right away in 2009. And I've seen it come a long way over the last 11, 12 years. There used to be like 5 startups that I could count on my one hand back in 2009, or at least I'm obviously trivializing it, but 5 real startups compared to a lot of startups now and so forth. And I think every ecosystem certainly needs, it takes time, it takes effort. Seattle ecosystem was born out of Microsoft success. Silicon Valley's ecosystem was born out of Intel success. DC has seen AOL and MicroStrategy, and there are founders coming out of these large companies and starting companies and so forth, and things like that. So I will say how things have changed over the last few years. In full transparency and honesty, it's still a little bit of a struggle to convince somebody to come and work for a startup who has not worked for a startup before. People who come, who work for the government or work for large companies, there's a lot of, you have to sell the vision, the reason why they should leave their large stable jobs to come and work for a startup. It's actually easier to recruit people who have worked in other startups and have experienced the growth and so forth. So with more startups, that becomes easier. And some of our best hires are the folks who have seen some success through the O-Powers of the world. For example, O-Power is one of those companies that grew out of the DC area, went public. Many of their founding team members are investors at Ordway, and we hired a lot of people from O-Power. I'm just using O-Power as an example, but we have other employees from other such companies who have grown from the area, like Optoro or TrackMaven and Contactually. So that is how the ecosystem is getting better and evolving as more people get experience in the startup world. They know what it is like to come and work in the startup world as compared to someone who has never been there. And it's a little bit of a challenge and selling. It's a new world because, startups are a little bit of a bumpy ride, as we all know.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else kind of want to share their experiences with kind of over the last few years of what they've seen evolve?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think one of the things that I've noticed is that it's tougher to raise institutional capital. Once upon a time, I would say 10, 15, maybe even 20 years back, you could, get introduced to the right venture capitalist, have a meal at the Capitol Grill. And if you spun up a great story and had a good deck, they'd invite you in for the meeting on Tuesday to meet the remaining members of the VC and get a term sheet, sometimes right there on the spot. Those days are gone. If you don't have monthly recurring revenues, if you don't have, some stability, some green shoots coming out of the ground, it's just harder, to get that $5-10 million check on a crazy valuation. I don't think you're going to see those days come back in the local market, maybe on the West Coast, but certainly not here.
And Beth, you've kind of seen the market evolve over a number of years with all of the different ranges of companies that you've worked with. What are some of the trends that that you've seen and kind of some of the changes that you've seen go on in the DMV startup market?
Well, I think a few observations, maybe just looking at it more positively. I feel like I've seen a lot more collaboration and interest in entrepreneurialism in our community. So years ago, it felt like, this town was defined as, federal government and bureaucracy. And yes, we've had a lot of innovation and, high tech, high growth. But it feels more recently there has been an interest in collaboration around entrepreneurialism, a lot of it driven by people like you doing things like this, and communities really coming together. And while, yes, interests are local, and we still have the DMV separated by the big ocean, it feels like, and maybe this is also sparked from COVID, it's easier to collaborate around business ideas now than it was before. And, my hope is that this region will be well positioned to attract funders that are interested in, really longer term investments coming from unsuspecting entrepreneurs like women and minorities. And I think our community is well poised for that because, people who live here really care about the world. And that's the one thing that we have that is more powerful than any other community in this country. I think it's very authentic to us and to this region. And while the rest of the world is divided, I do feel like this region is united around that. And I hope that it will continue to bring in investors who are interested in funding people here.
Great, thank you. We've heard that from different groups that we've spoken to, that concept of and that attribute particular marketplace. Beth, so it's great to hear. Andrea, what have you kind of experienced as somebody launching a company in the DMV market?
Sure. I can give my perspective from being a company in the biotech space in the DMV area. You can't really start a biotech company out of your bedroom or your home because you can't really grow, deadly organisms in your home. So I think that we think there are a number of resources that startups can take advantage of in the DMV area. One resource that we specifically took advantage of was the Baltimore Underground Science Space, or BUGS. And that's essentially a great community lab or a hacker space in Baltimore City, and a great space for early startups like ours to demonstrate proof of concept for an idea or a medical device that we're trying to commercialize. And I think there are a lot of accelerators and incubators that I've seen pop up, recently that are available for startup companies in both IT as well as biotech spaces, and those have really helped with the growing the startup ecosystem for biotechnology in the DMV area.
One of the things that we've that's come up in the first part of this conversation had really been around COVID and the impact of COVID on the business side. It would, as leaders of companies that you're running, I think it would be interesting to hear a little bit about, what you've learned as a leader over this past year, and maybe to be able to share that in terms of things that you've personally learned coming out of COVID and all of the impacts of COVID. And maybe, Andrea, we can start with you, and then everybody else, feel free to jump in and share your experiences.
So as far as COVID, I can tell you that it has been, while it's been a tragedy, it has actually been a good thing in terms of business and visibility for some companies in the biotech space and diagnostic space specifically, like our company. For example, we at Novel Micro Devices built the technology underpinning our diagnostics platform with the view of creating most sensitive and rapid and cost-effective diagnostic tests for STDs. And, when COVID hit, we found that to be a good point to, take our platform and develop it for other infectious diseases. And it's given us a lot of visibility as a startup company, not only, with investors, but also with non-dilutive capital in the form of grants. There have been a lot of grant funding that has been billions of dollars of grant funding that has come available for diagnostics companies specifically. So that has been a good thing for us, and we recently received some of that funding from from the NIH, from RADx, to develop saliva tests for COVID. So our launch strategy has shifted from what we originally wanted it to be to COVID, and this has basically given us an opportunity to launch our product faster to market. So we're expecting our product to be launched in Q3, Q4 of this year, versus if we went our original route, our earliest time to market would have been Q4 of 2022.
So that's a rapid acceleration and a lot of things you have to prepare for a company that's going to launch a product not too long from now. So,
Andrea, I'm thrilled to hear that COVID has had a positive impact on some businesses, and I've seen that in other industries, but boy, for us, it was a game changer, and not in a positive way. We really, initially when COVID hit in March, I would say by May, our business was completely stalled. A big portion of our portfolio was in hospitality, and also in industries that were tied into big events, and a lot of that revenue just completely dried up. So for us, it really required a complete reimagining of our business at a very rapid pace, helping guide our clients through a changing landscape, the clients that were continuing to invest, and to immediately look for new product opportunities, look for opportunities to diversify our client roster. And I am really proud to say that we are on the path to recovery, and it has been an incredible journey of learning and growing and thinking differently about the way we do things. And in some ways, it felt like we went back to our roots of a startup, and kind of taking that step back, looking at our business fresh again. And as a friend of mine said, never let a crisis go to waste. Use this as an opportunity to improve and grow. And I would say that is the one thing I learned as a leader, is the power of just having that, kind of open mind in looking at my business, looking at what was happening in the world around us, and helping guide and navigate my company toward the opportunities that are there. And it has been an incredible journey. The other big learning is, I think, the power of collaboration. And I mentioned it before, but to me, I have never had an experience in my career where I have been so connected in with my competitors and with other leaders in my industry. People are really stepping up to help one another. And I think that's a very beautiful thing. And it's something that I hope will live on beyond this crisis, because a lot of good things are happening when we share experiences and learn together. So lots of learnings in this for me.
and the collaboration, as Tien said at the beginning, is kind of something really important to us as well in starting the monthly blend, is just the power of collaboration across so many different sectors and segments within the DMV just makes a much more powerful ecosystem for everyone who has a part in it. John, what did you kind of learn, and how has it been experienced by you?
Yeah, so pre-COVID, our whole business is 100% based on relationships, right? We're very blessed as an ecosystem at the Unicorn Group to have over 6,000 senior executives across every vertical you can imagine. We've been at it for 18 years. Pre-COVID, my day would consist of jumping in a car and traveling to 3, 4, 5 different meetings. And the greater Washington area, you can't get anywhere without spending at least an hour in your car. And then you have a 1-hour meeting, and then you got to get in your car and you got to drive another hour and a half to another meeting. So I would always joke with my wife that every day I was spending the equivalent of driving to New York if you really tracked the number of miles. But you did that because it was a great business. And so when COVID hit, I'm thinking to myself, my goodness, we can't go anywhere. I can't go to the Tower Club. I can't go to the golf course. I can't have coffee with someone at the Ritz. which were the bedrocks of how we would do our business. Everything's got to be done through Zoom. How's that going to work? But I got to tell you, in the last 10 months, we haven't doubled in revenue, but we've done far better than we would have pre-COVID. Part of it is because of Zoom. I'm not driving. I get up in the morning, I shave, I shower, I eat breakfast, I come downstairs to my home office. I'm doing twice as many Zoom meetings as I was doing in-person meetings, but our revenues have not suffered. And I think that's a testament to the richness of the executive relationship ecosystem that we have for folks to say, hey, John, you don't have to come out and break bread with me. If you want to set up that same meeting through Zoom, we're happy to do it. So that was an epiphany for us. We weren't sure how that was going to work out. The other piece too that I've learned, and it's tied to my second business, Din, which is a pure startup, is that having passion and purpose really matters now more than ever, because we're not hugging, we're not touching each other. So if you're going to get into a new business, you better love what you're doing, because you're in a bunker, and we're going to be for the foreseeable future, even with the vaccines, because the vaccines are a temporary fix until the next COVID comes around. I'm not wishing it on us, but I think the whole virus situation is just going to be a permanent way of how we do business, and we're just going to have to navigate through. So I'm very passionate and purposeful and intentional about a lot of things that I do that I otherwise wasn't paying attention to pre-COVID.
Great, thank you. That's great to hear that you've experienced that during this past 10 months. And then Samir, how has COVID been for you, and kind of what have been some of the lessons you've learned as the leader?
Yeah, I will echo some of the sentiment I've heard, that we all have had to reinvent how we work, live, and do business in general. Pre-COVID, we were always work from anywhere culture, but we were very much a DC company. We still have an office space that people come to and so forth, but we were all like, as a software tech company, we always had, always had the culture that you don't have to come to the office and just, you don't have to come to the office to be heads down and do your work. You come to the office to actually collaborate with others. If your day looks like you have to sit down and work heads down, you can work from home. So we were always that. As far as the business is concerned, yes, we were still very much meet people, get on the plane, go meet customers, close deals by actually visiting our customers on their site, no matter where in the world they were. That had to change, that had to be reinvented. And yes, we have become much better at, and in fact, more than us getting better at closing business over Zoom, our customers have become much better of buying software over Zoom, So that way also, it has been a little bit of an evolution. There some large deals we would never have been able to do without actually first meeting the people. And we are a small company. Anyone who is banking on a tiny little startup to be the billing backbone of an organization, we have companies who process hundreds of millions of dollars of transactions through our platform. They're like, who is Ordway? So the ability to go and meet them in person and showcase we are real people actually was very good. So that way people have evolved. I do feel that COVID had an impact on our ability to grow. We doubled our revenues in 2020 over 2019. For all practical purposes, that's a measurement of success. But as a venture-backed startup, we were definitely projecting a lot more than doubling our revenues in 2020. So it was a little bit of a mixed bag that when COVID did hit us, the first 2 quarters, pretty much we had to slam the brakes, but things started to pick up in the second half of the year, and things started to pick up really well in the second half of the year. And then as Beth, you were saying, why waste a good crisis? We certainly were fortunate to have raised a huge influx of capital right before COVID began. And we used the capital to acquire talent otherwise which wouldn't have been available because of, without COVID, if you will. So we doubled down on our strategy of talent acquisition and work from anywhere. We started hiring people outside the DC region. We started hiring people wherever they are. We have also now we had an office in Brazil and we had an office in India. Now we are planning on actually opening an office in Silicon Valley when everybody is thinking of leaving Silicon Valley. So there are certain opportunities that have opened up in the new way of thinking, and we continue to evolve. I think I still feel that I'm still banking on the day to come back where we will get on a plane and go meet our customers and meet them in person. And I think even though the buying cycles have become easier, that face-to-face is irreplaceable, and I'm banking on that to come back.
Yeah, that's really impressive. You guys are, entrepreneurs are indefatigable. Entrepreneurs, even something huge like a global pandemic, they figure out a way to make lemonade out of lemons. I heard yesterday that I was on a panel with some CFOs, and basically somebody said, the thing about the pandemic is they're sort of it's not comparing virtual to in-person pre-COVID, it's comparing virtual to nothing. So of course, if your alternative is nothing, the virtual way of doing business has to be done. And it's amazing that you guys are so resilient and able to do that. I mean, John, you launched a company which is benefiting, I do want to give you some airtime on that, but it's a double bottom line company. You're benefiting chefs that have been displaced. I mean, Andrea, you are figuring out ways to help diagnose COVID. Samir, you're hiring people from around the world. Beth, you guys are rallying. I mean, very, very impressive. I would like to talk now maybe a little more regionally, Baltimore, Washington region, technology region. Samir, you touched on this briefly with respect to your comments, contrasting us against, say, Silicon Valley or Seattle. But what do you guys see as some potential opportunities to improve sort of the ecosystem of entrepreneurship in the region, not just tech, but all entrepreneurship? And maybe I'd like to start with the unicorn himself, John, because you launched a business, a brand new business, putting aside your super successful core business called the Unicorn Group, but you launched Din Din. Maybe you can take us through your thoughts behind that, and how did you bring together the various resources in the region?
Yeah, thank you. So not to take up too much airtime, basically August 20th of this past year, 6 months ago, I decided on a whim based on this crisis that Beth talked about, never let a good crisis go to waste. I agree with her. I looked out on the landscape and I saw various verticals that were popping up on the news all the time, right? Airlines have been slammed, commercial real estate's been slammed. We all hear about it. Hospitality and hotels have been slammed. And then I heard about the restaurant industry being slammed, right? Hundreds of thousands of restaurants closing down, chefs sitting on the sideline waiting for rescue capital to come that wasn't coming anytime soon. And so I raised my hand and said I was going to do something about it. And what came out of that discussion in my head was this company called Din Din that we launched less than 6 months ago. And to Tien's point, what we're doing essentially, it's a dual marketplace online. We're aggregating all of the chefs, or as many chefs as want to be on a platform, who want to continue with their passion of cooking, but don't want to be burdened with the friction of finding a customer, delivering the food to the customer, collecting the payments, and they also don't want to be burdened with the CapEx or the OpEx of the brick and mortar side of a restaurant, right? And so what we're doing is we're curating them, allowing them to cook out of ghost or commercial kitchens around the region and selling that consumer product direct to consumers. We've got 10 chefs working out of 3 ghost kitchens right now. Obviously, it's going to scale over time. We've got 700 families right now that are signed up. I think, Beth, I don't know if you sampled our food. I'm sure. I know Tien, you have as well. So it's very, very early. Thank you. Very early. The mobile apps are up for Droid and iOS. We just launched those a couple of months ago. So the reception's been very positive, but that's a situation where out of a crisis, there's opportunity, and it's a passion project for me. I mentioned earlier about passion and purpose. We'll make a couple of bucks along the way. I'm sure there'll be some sort of liquidity event, but I'm really passionate about waking up every morning and trying to help chefs get back in the game. And if
Yeah, no,
that's,
congrats on that. And just in terms of the community in the Baltimore, Washington tech community, or the entrepreneurial community, how have you tapped into that? And what would you like to have seen that would be a little different, that would have made getting Din up, a little easier for you guys?
That's a great question. Things have been moving so fast. I haven't had a chance to really, because I'm still doing my day job, right? But I would say that if I had to do it all over again, what I would have done is partnered with the IT company that we've recently transitioned to, Kiwi Tech. You guys probably know of them. A great company. I was on their board of advisors about 4 years ago, and I don't know why I didn't think of them back in August. But I went with another friend of mine up in New York, and they were fine, but just not being part of the DMV and the fact that we've got to do everything through Zoom, something got lost in translation. And I wish going back in August, I would have just defaulted to Kiwi Tech, but we've transitioned over to Kiwi Tech now. And I think we're going to scale a lot faster. So access to IT, access to capital, again, I'm very fortunate to have friends like Tien who can pick up the phone and introduce me to whoever I want to talk to from an investor point of view. But it's not that easy. If you're not tapped into the VC community here, it's not easy to just name 5 VCs off the top of your head. In Silicon Valley, everybody knows where everybody, my son works for Google and he lived in Mountain View before he moved. And so it's just a totally different culture on the West Coast, right? Where they pretty much, it's a badge of honor for you to go through 5 startups and fail 4 times. On the East Coast, if you fail once, nobody wants to give you $50,000. It's just a different world, right? And I think, Samir, you can speak to that because you've lived in the Valley. But I just wish that this ecosystem was culturally bent towards allowing you to try more companies like Din. Whether you pass or fail, it just helps create more confidence in more people coming out and pursuing their dreams.
Thank you for that so much. How about you, Andrea? What are your thoughts on the community? I know sometimes the biotech guys are sort of in their silo and the cyber people are in their silo. And, how have you approached sort of integrating your business activities with the ecosystem, and what would you like to see better?
Yeah, so for biotech startups in the DMV area, I think the Launchport, which is a new medical device manufacturing accelerator with GMP facilities in the Baltimore Port Covington area, has been a very welcome development. And in fact, we moved our manufacturing and our headquarters to the Launchport facility in 2021. Facilities and accelerators like these, they bridge the gap between research and manufacturing and speed up commercialization and time to market. So more of these types of accelerators in the area would be very beneficial. And the other thing that I see, lacking in the DMV area that biotech companies could use is, there's been a real big lack of lab space in the DMV area, and that's been a surprise to us because we currently, as a company, are growing. We started last year, we were 6 people, and now we are 20 people. So, getting that lab space, access to that lab space, is pretty challenging, actually, especially in these COVID times where, ramping up of diagnostic testing and lab testing has gone up. So we've had that struggle. And I think I agree with John on, access to capital in this area and a mechanism to facilitate, sit down meetings with local investors or local angel groups or VC firms. That would be very welcome to startups.
Well, all good ideas. I want to move to Beth because, Beth, you've been operating in both Virginia and Maryland for a long time. I think you're headquartered in Maryland right now. Mm-hmm. But you've had the opportunity to be in this community for 20 years. You're on the board of very active charitably and philanthropically with Junior Achievement. So you have a good window on sort of the entrepreneurial community. Any thoughts on how we can improve this?
Yes. In fact, I was thinking about, as I was reflecting on this as you were talking, Andrea, and you mentioned the word siloed. And I still think that our region is siloed, and not necessarily by geography as much as by size of business. And it feels like, the big business leaders that are in the economic club and the board of trade and the big regional banks and the lawyers and the government contractors are all coming together, and they value innovation, and they understand that the key to solving some of these problems in the world are going to require startups getting involved in this funding. But yet they are still operating in a silo. It feels like the entrepreneurial community and the VC community is almost independent of those groups. And I feel like the region needs to integrate, and we need to start bringing these thought leaders together on a regular basis, which I know is part of what you are championing and with this type of work, Tien. But it does still feel like it's a very siloed region. And I think that, we can solve problems like cybersecurity. We can be leaders in solving, for preventing the next pandemic and solving this one. And we can do that through innovation and through investment, but we have to have people working together toward a common goal. And I just feel like that's something that has to change.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's about getting people, the right game changers in a room together, frequently communicating and trying to push this region forward. I mean, Samir, you of all of us, you have the most global view, having lived and worked out in the Valley. And if you had a magic wand, knowing our limitations here in the DMV and Baltimore regions, both politically as well as just that we're less mature than, say, Silicon Valley. But if you had your magic wand and you built a very successful early stage company in Ordway, what would have made Ordway grow faster and bigger, if we had certain ingredients in this region?
Yeah, for sure. Before I pinpoint that, let me step back just a little bit, right? Where what does a company need to be successful, right? Great entrepreneurs will start businesses anywhere. So why does location matter? If you have a great company, if you have a great idea and a great solution to a problem out there, you need two things to scale the business. You need access to talent and you need access to capital, right? Most of you have been alluding to the lack of access of capital in DC, but you can always go outside DC and get capital too. That's what we have done. We have gone outside DC, and most of our investors are over there. And what John, you're alluding to is also absolutely right, that the DC-based investors are ultra conservative compared to some of the investors who are outside DC, but no investor likes to lose money. So it's not like the Silicon Valley investor would just throw away money on a foolish idea, hoping that it would become big, versus a DC-based East Coast investor would only invest in an idea that is tried and proven at a conservative valuation. It's just that there are a lot more smaller investors in a region like Silicon Valley. And even if you are raising capital on a really, I wouldn't say foolish idea, but a risky idea, you do have a lot more investors to pool tiny amounts of capital that you can pull together to create a round of funding, compared to one or two investors giving you a lot of capital for your business idea and so forth, right? So when I was raising capital outside DC, I have been told by scores of investors that they only invest in San Francisco, New York, or Boston. And I would ask them why. They used to say that if you want to create a $1 billion company, you need to hire executives who have previously created $1 billion companies. Where do you hire these executives from? Do you have other $1 billion companies to go after in DC to go and to answer your question, Tien, like that is not a straightforward answer. Sure, we have a few $1 billion companies over here that we can go to, MicroStrategy, Opower, and hire these executives. But I would also argue the solution to that is can you convince an executive who has been part of a $1 billion company outside DC and get them to move to DC, right? So there is that angle to look at it. So this is where the VC mindset is. VCs are ultra conservative people in general. Nobody likes to lose money. The reason they are betting in their own backyard is because it's their backyard. It's just convenient for them, right? So how do we open up? It's not like DC does not have wealthy individuals or wealthy people who will start funds over here. How do we change that culture, and how do we change that mindset that nobody's asking you to take risky bets? We are just asking you to take more bets. So diversify your portfolio. You may invest in 100 companies. Maybe one of them will become the next Stripe, if you will, or Living Social, if you will. So it's not a straightforward answer, but I am committed to growing a successful business in DC. I have been told by my own board members that they don't think that you can high growth sales engine outside DC, and I'm here to prove them wrong. I want to say that sure, if we can't hire those high power people in DC, we will hire those high power people wherever they are, but we will still be a DC based company and make a $1 billion company out of DC. So that's the mindset that we are going with as well. But what do we do to change the mindset of the people? Like I've had conversation with DC investors, and candidly, we raised 10 million in Series A funding. Most of the DC or even Philadelphia local firms told me that I'm being too aggressive. When I went with the same proposal to Silicon Valley companies, I was told you're being too conservative. So who is right and who is wrong, right? At the end of the day, you as an entrepreneur needs to decide what is your risk profile. Are you the kind of like the access to capital in Silicon Valley is abundant, which is why people take risky bets. If you are able to take $50 million in funding, you have the luxury to take more risky bets compared to when you raise $4 or $5 million in funding. You do not have the luxury to take risky bets. You will take very, very measured bets, and you will grow slowly compared to a risky bet that just takes off and you would grow exponentially, basically. So that is the difference. And at the end of the day, it's not about East Coast investor or investor. It's about my profile. My profile was the road. I didn't want to be too conservative. I didn't want to be too aggressive. And I wanted to be what I feel comfortable I am. So the middle of the road is you try and find investors who align with your risk profile, the entrepreneur's risk profile, and you grow the business from that point on. So I wouldn't blame the access to capital. I would just say the entrepreneur mindset and yes, we are all products of the ecosystem to some extent. So the ecosystem makes us a little bit conservative, and then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy and so forth. But I think entrepreneurs themselves need to just get a little bit bold, prove out their ideas, and create a plan. And if you want, there is access to capital outside DC. You can bring to DC, basically.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think I'm seeing more companies come in because of COVID and because of the necessity to work virtually. We're seeing outside investors from outside the region come into the region. So hopefully that trend will continue, and hopefully you guys will continue staying here in DC, because we need lots of role models and examples like Ordway and you, who believe in the region and who can actually be, an example of, hey, this guy didn't have to move out to the Valley to get money. He didn't have to move out to the Valley to build his business and find talent, because we have a lot of that here.
Let me add one more thing too. I think one of the things that would be helpful in this region is if we can get DC, Maryland, and Virginia at the state level to infuse some non-dilutive capital. Andrea mentioned non-dilutive capital in her space, but they all want us to be here and to pay taxes. But I don't see any of them putting up non-dilutive, unless, of course, you're in biotech. That's a world that I don't know. But if you got a B2C value proposition that you want to gin up, where do you go to get $100,000 real quick without going through a lot of hoops, right? That's non-dilutive. That's the key. That's non-dilutive. I don't see that. We've got the TEDCOs and we've got, a bunch of, Maryland Venture Fund and so on and so on. But, there's always this dilution, there's options, there's warrants, there's all this hair that's around it when you're really, really bootstrapping. So it'd be nice if there was a bucket of money, a regional bucket of money from Maryland, Virginia, and DC that was non-dilutive, that will allow the ecosystem to have the sandbox to really play at a high level.
Yeah.
That is a good point. I actually concur with that. Where now actually I'm coming back to Tian's question and the answer. Like what's really missing is in the DC area is early stage capital. By the time you get to Series A level, you have already proven out your business, right? But the early stage capital is provided by folks like Maryland Venture Fund at the state level. I mean, of course, there is the private ecosystem, but what we can do as founders and leaders of the DC ecosystem is maybe we could lobby, like some DC mayor or grant fund to actually create a framework for state-sponsored grants for entrepreneurs to experiment with the early stages of the idea. That is the hardest capital to find where, I was fortunate enough to put my own capital when I started experimenting with Ordway, but many people don't have that luxury. So that is where state-sponsored grants can play a huge role.
I wanted to say that it's not just state non-dilutive capital, but there is a large amount of federal non-dilutive capital in the form of SBIR grants, that's small business innovation grants. You could apply for a grant and you get, within 6 months, you get $150,000 to prove your idea. And then, $2 million and $4 million in a phase 2 grant. So that's something which you could look into as non-dilutive capital on the federal level.
In terms of the collaboration, are there ways for founders to kind of help each other more? What are different things that we could put into place to help different stakeholders, founders help each other in the de-risking of businesses that they're building?
Well, I can pipe in on that, Anthony, because I think there are so many great organizations for founders to join and collaborate and share best practices and thought leadership around these issues, regardless of their stage. And, there's EO, there's YPO, there's all kinds of organizations like that. And I think being part of that community where, you're addressing those issues with one another and shared experiences is a great way to mitigate risk.
And I think I can add that, there are programs like the Maryland Tech Council, for example, has the venture or the mentor program. And I think TEDCO has a mentor program. And those programs can also be helpful to have access to early stage founders like myself who have never started a company. Having access to those types of mentors is very helpful.
Ordway has raised capital from 4 major funds, and by virtue of that, I got added to founder mailing list of those 4 funds. And I will tell you, those mailing lists are the best mailing lists ever. It's obviously a very close-knit group because it's restricted to that fund's founders only. So it's not like anybody can get added to it, but people feel free to ask anything that's on their mind as founders. Like, the hard questions. Being a founder is a very lonely job, as you all know. And you don't always have right people to bounce ideas from. Any idea like from, hey, what software would you use for sales, or what software would to very thought-provoking questions? How do you fire somebody, or how do you handle somebody dying of COVID in your team or team members and things like that? And people have opened up. There have been some amazing conversations in those groups. Now, it would be nice to have something like that at a little bit more DC-centric place, but I think the challenge also is how do you keep it controlled where people feel free? By virtue of being part of a fund, it is a control group. There are like 20 or 30 founders in there, not 300 founders in there. So there is that element of it. But I'm just sharing my perspective that some of these mailing lists are very useful as a founder/CEO on asking some questions that you can only ask fellow founders and CEOs.
I would suggest at the university level that there's a better job of cross-pollinating the various startup ecosystems, whether it's the University of Maryland or whether it's Marymount or George Mason. I mean, I think Dingman's done a great job, right? In part because they're the 800-pound gorilla. But there's wonderful talent in small nooks like Catholic University or UDC, or, there's students at George Mason that want to press their nose against the candy store window. They've got great ideas, but unless they schlep out to College Park, they feel sort of left out. So if we could have sort of a regional consortium, maybe is the word, branded consortium that stitches them all together and they meet regularly, 19-year-olds, 21-year-olds, as well as folks like us, to just constantly talk about how this ecosystem can exchange information in a richer way. I think that, rising tide raises all boats.
Great. I think all very powerful ideas. And I think, even just what was talked about before by Samir in terms of talent and how do we keep, people who are building great companies staying in the DC region and having those groups of people kind of become the seeds for the next generations and groups of startups coming out will be very important as well. So I think we're kind of coming down to the end of our time together. I just want to see if Tien has anything that he would like to ask before we wrap up the show.
No, absolutely. And I know I do have a final question. It might take, I don't know, Anthony, 5 minutes or so to just get everyone's thoughts on this, but I would like to know what you guys, and I know that DE and I are totally near and dear to all of you guys, and it's super important in our region. I really think DC should be very proud of the fact that in terms of championing, women entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of color, we are much further along than other regions, although we have a very long way to go. But, I'd like to start with you, Beth, because I know you've been a champion ever since I've known you, and so proud of everything you're doing on behalf of, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you talk a little bit about, what you see, how we can continue raising the bar on that front? And I would like to ask the other panelists as well, but starting with you, Beth.
Well, thank you for the question. I think it is of critical importance for corporations to and organizations, communities, and government to step up, because really, if you think about it, passive consumerism is a thing of the past, and the next generation, first of all, this generation and the next generation is going to hold companies accountable. So companies are required to do the right thing. And part of that is, yes, setting an example and being a responsible and ethical business person, doing things like, treating their employees well, protecting the environment, all of that. But a big piece of this is expanding opportunities for women and minorities. And this is no longer it is an absolute expectation. And companies are going to be held to account. And I think that's a good thing, because that is how we will change our communities and the diversity and the expansion of opportunities among minorities and women and rural entrepreneurs and others that honestly haven't had the same opportunities as many of us. So I think I applaud the question, and I'm sure that my panelists have a lot of good ideas about how to accomplish that.
Sure. Andrea, how about you? I mean, biotechnology is notoriously a man's domain, and it's great to see women getting more involved in STEM and STEAM, and nothing thrills me more than to see young girls that are really passionate about physics and science, and because it's such a rare thing. And I think we do have to start at the ground floor. But what do you think? What are you doing to promote? Obviously, you're a female founder in a male-dominated industry, but are there things that you're bringing to the table, and what would you like to see in terms of improvement?
I guess more. I think one thing that I'd like to see is more women, or more programs that encourage women to be in the STEM, science and technology fields. And currently that seems like it's more male dominated. Therefore, biotechnology companies seem to be more male dominated. But I feel like as a woman, women really just want equal opportunity, not more opportunities. And I'm not sure how else to comment about this, because I come from a different background. I came here as an immigrant from India. So, back in my country, things are even worse than they are over here. So I'm very grateful actually to the opportunities that women are given in the states. And TEDCO, for example, in the state of Maryland, has this Builder Fund, which is a fund specifically to engage or mentor founders who are minority and women owned, who have women or minority owned founders, and businesses with women or minority owned founders. And I think more programs like that would essentially help women take the front seat.
And just to pipe in, Andrea, tomorrow, or actually Monday, there's a Business Journal women's mentoring event, and I'm participating in it. And I am going to make a note to actually nominate you as a woman in science to become a mentor for other women, because I think that is exactly how it happens. Women championing women, and kudos to you.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Thanks so much, Ben.
Great. John?
Yeah, so gosh, that question is one of those that you could have a panel for 4 hours, right? Just talking about it. I mean, it's such a big movement, but it makes my heart smile when you see a company like, was it Bumble that went public earlier this week, right? And to see the founder holding her baby, and I think her personal net worth shot up to like 1.8 billion. That's a crazy number, right? That's wonderful. And for all of us to see that, or for me to realize a week ago, I was having a conversation with someone and he told me, did you know that the founder of Calendly is African-American? Yeah. I had no idea. And it's valued at, I don't know, $1, $2, $3 billion. I had no idea. So I think B2C, it has been wonderful. We need to do more of it. I think that enforcement, that E word, is really where the rubber meets the road. We can have a lot of highfalutin conversations at the state, federal, local, or even interpersonal, right? But unless you give a ticket for jaywalking, people will just keep jaywalking, right? And so once we get through the policy and the Black Lives Matter and all of that, what is the enforcement? Not necessarily punitive. I don't want to make it sound that way, but you've got to be able to enforce it, or it doesn't really matter in the long term. And so for me, that's where my head is. But from an optics point of view, just seeing the Bumble and hearing about the Calendly story, we've come a long way. We've got a long way to go, but you would not have seen either one of those a generation ago.
No, that's true. And it really is heartwarming to see that. These guys are really going to be they're paving the way. They're Jackie Robinson. They're making it happen now, so that in the next generation or two, you're just going to see an explosion of people of color. And like you said, as someone said earlier, it's not about getting a handout; it's about fairness. Just give me.
I think ultimately, John, it's going to be enforced by consumers.
Yes.
Wallets, and
Indeed.
that, and business leaders have to start making the changes at the top, at the board level, at the leadership level. And I do think that especially in those B2C examples, that consumers are going to hold them into account.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Great point. Samir, you got a word on this. What are your thoughts?
We have certainly come a long way, but it starts by being conscious about it. It's very easy to lose sight of that this is an important factor. For any startup in the early stages of the company, you are scrambling to hire talent. If you are not conscious of this, if it's a back burner, before you know it, suddenly you look around the room and there are all men in the room, right? So one has to be conscious of this, that we have to consciously go out and make sure that there is gender balanced workforce, diverse workforce, and so forth. We also have had to consciously keep reminding ourselves that there are certain roles in our company that just keep gravitating towards all male, and they attract. Attract is the wrong word. They also get other men whom they have worked with in the past and so forth. And the same thing applies to women, where women may bring in other women and so forth. So it all starts with being conscious about, we need to create a gender balanced workforce, hire the right people. And then there comes a point even in the executive layer, we say, you know what, we don't have enough women in the executive team. The remaining open positions are just it's probably politically incorrect to say it, but they're just close to men. You just have to fill the position with a woman executive so that it's a balanced workforce and so forth. I think long story short, one has to just be conscious of it and constantly keep working at it. That's the only way to solve the problem, basically.
Yeah, no, the great thoughts there. And it's funny. I agree with Beth. The consumers are going to vote, and it's all about money at the end of the day and how it flows from bottom up and up down. You look at why don't we have more women in VC? Well, because the LPs aren't demanding it. And I read something, sad but funny on Twitter. It said, look at the way VCs are embracing SPACs. They're all over it, right? And then this person on Twitter was like, what if they embrace DE&I the same way? There's no excuse. They can do it if they put their mind to it. But I think economic forces are going to have to be sort of the wind at our backs to help out. But anyway, regardless, you guys are all spectacular, fantastic. And Anthony and I are totally thrilled that you guys could join us and spend a few hours and kind of share your thoughts. And thank you so much for your time. And we're very, very grateful. So keep doing the great things you guys are doing. And we appreciate all of the wonderful interconnectivity and positivity that you're bringing to the whole region as a whole. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys.